What is going on, everybody? What is going on, the Catch fam? My name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we are hopping into our starts and sits for the quarterback position for Week 10 of the 2022 fantasy football season. If you guys do enjoy today's content, be sure to hit that like button on the way in. Hit that subscribe button, of course, if you are new to the channel. It really does help us out when you guys hit that like and consider subscribing. And please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Without further ado, let's hop into today's video. All right, Thursday night football, we got the Falcons at the Panthers. I think we can continue to consider Marcus Mariota as a streaming option on a weekly basis, but you just have to understand he is a boom or bust streaming option. He still comes in as quarterback 12 so far on the season, but if we look at the last 4 weeks alone, in week 6 against San Francisco, he had 24.1 fantasy points. Week 7 against Cincinnati, 12 fantasy points. Week 8 against Carolina, 24.4 fantasy points, and in week 9 it's a Chargers, 7.5 fantasy points. So it's extremely inconsistent all over the place. But the last time that the Falcons and the Panthers played each other just 2 weeks ago, we got a really good game script from a fantasy perspective. This is a big game in terms of this division overall, and this division is wide open at the moment, so I expect it to be a competitive game once again, even though it is on Thursday night. So Mariota in week 9, like I said, 7.5 fantasy points, 129 passing yards, 24 yards on the ground, and 0 touchdowns. One of his worst performances, his second worst performance of the year, but I really do think you can consider Marcus Mariota if you're desperate for a streaming option as we move in to the week. Moving on to the Panthers, PJ Walker, my guy, came back to earth in week 9, -1 fantasy points, got benched for Baker Mayfield, an absolute disaster of a day after having 17.6 fantasy points in week 8 against Atlanta, where he threw for 317 passing yards, a touchdown, and interception, and had 20 rushing yards. So I don't think we can trust PJ Walker, and even if you wanted to stream him, if you were that desperate, he does not bring a good ceiling. You know, even in his best game of the season, he still only had 17.6 fantasy points. So I say on a short week, even though I expect this game script to be pretty decent overall, we are still sitting PJ Walker as we approach week 10. Right, moving into Sunday slate, we got a game in Germany. We got the Seahawks at the Buccaneers, or I guess Seahawks versus the Buccaneers. Overall, GENO Smith is your quarterback 8 in fantasy football. He had a 21.8 fantasy performance in week 9. That comes in as his third best performance on the season. 275 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception, and 38 rushing yards. I still think GENO Smith is in the streaming category for the season because he's had some really low floors on the season so far. But at the same time, the Seahawks offense is kind of for real, right? I mean, we started giving GENO some props a couple weeks ago. He started to kind of disappoint, but now he's playing at that high level again. This Seahawks team as a whole is playing good football, so I do think that GENO Smith is a quarterback you can definitely consider as we approach the week. Tom Brady, on the other hand, has been struggling. I mean, it's week in and week out. He's projected 18 points or 20 points, 22 points, whatever it is, and he is just flat out disappointing. This Buccaneers offense as a whole is flat out disappointing. The Seahawks defense is actually quite good. I don't love this matchup for Tom Brady. I don't love it for a lot of the Buccaneers offensive players outside of the receiver position, because I think once again the Buccaneers are going to be forced into a game script where they need to throw the football. That could benefit Tom Brady, who had 58 pass attempts in week 9. I mean, literally since week 3 of the season, he's had 42 or more pass attempts. He is throwing the football a ton, but overall this offense is just not getting it done. Brady is a quarterback I'm sitting here in week 10. All right, Lions at Bears. I'm sitting Jared Goff. He's your quarterback 15 in fantasy football, but the last 4 weeks have been flat out ugly. There was a point in the season where we could stream Jared Goff, and I think that point in the season is long gone. It's a pretty good game script over here with the Bears. Should be a high-scoring affair. This game could get really out of hand very quickly, but overall, Goff, who had 6.8 points in week 5, 3.5 in week 7, 18.6 in week 8, and 12.3 in week 9, is just far too inconsistent and is playing with far too low of a ceiling overall at the moment for us to consider him moving in to the week. Justin Fields, on the other hand, is the exact opposite. All we've heard since Sunday in the fantasy community is Justin Fields, Justin Fields. Justin Fields, and why wouldn't you? 42.7 points in week 9, 123 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 178 rushing yards, an NFL record for the quarterback position in a regular season game, and a rushing touchdown as well. He's your quarterback 7 in fantasy football, and overall he's been a top 5 quarterback since week 5 of the season. He is a must start against an abysmal Lions defense. No way about it. If Justin Fields is on your roster, he might be my must start of the week, right next to Patrick Mahomes, who's playing at an extremely high level, and right next to Jalen Hurts, who gets the Washington Commanders defense this week. Justin Fields is in that caliber of elite quarterbacks from a fantasy perspective as we approach week 10. All right, Browns at Dolphins. Jacoby Brissett coming off of his best fantasy performance of the year in week 8. The Browns were on bye week in week 9, but 20.3 fantasy points against the Bengals on Monday Night Football, 278 passing yards, a touchdown. And he added 12 rushing yards as well as a rushing touchdown, but I'm still not starting Jacoby Brissett as we approach the week. It should be a good game script between these two teams, but I do believe that the Browns will rely on the run game in this matchup. If you're absolutely desperate, I mean, don't get me wrong, double quarterback leagues, super flex leagues, he's fine. But outside of that, I don't want him in our starting lineups as we approach the week. On the other hand, Tua time continues to be a start. He's playing really good football. Most importantly, over the last 2 weeks, he's been a lot more consistent. He's your quarterback 11 in fantasy football, and he's missed, we'll say 3 games. He exited week 4 pretty early in that game, so about 3 games overall, though he got 14 pass attempts and in week 4. But overall, in the last 2 weeks, at least 24 or more fantasy points. He gets Cleveland here in week 10. The Dolphins just overall are allowing for really good game scripts from a fantasy perspective. Tua is in your starting lineups. I mean, just look at the weapons he has at his disposal in Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill, and that run game only being elevated with the addition of Jeff Wilson. This offense just looks dynamic, man. Tua is a great start as we approach the week. All right, Broncos at Titans. This game is ugly for the quarterback position. I'm going to sit Russell Wilson, who has not had more than 14.7 fantasy points in his last 3 matchups. And really, I mean, week 4, he had 27.4, but outside of that, he is not top 17 fantasy points on the season except for week 1. So overall, just not good ceilings for Russell Wilson. This Titans defense has a really bad secondary, so I could see some big plays incoming for guys like Jerry Jeudy, Sutton, and Greg Dulcich, but I still think that the pass rush for the Titans and their ability to stop the run is really going to limit the Broncos, so I don't love this matchup for Russell Wilson, who's already been an incredibly mediocre quarterback on the season. On the other hand, I don't quite know at this point in the week who is starting for the Tennessee Titans, if it's going to be Ryan Tannehill or Malik Willis. Tannehill's still dealing with an ankle injury. He's missed the last 2 weeks, but overall, this is a really bad matchup for the Titans quarterbacks as well. The Broncos are one of the best units in the entire NFL against quarterbacks from a fantasy perspective, and they are extremely good against opposing receivers as well. In case you didn't know, there's not a single productive receiver on the Tennessee Titans football team at the moment. Malik Willis, showed some nice flashes in his 2 starts so far, but from a fantasy perspective, no reason to consider him. And Tannehill, I just don't like in this matchup. This is going to be a day where Derrick Henry and the Broncos defense square off. That's going to be the ultimate game script in terms of this matchup. So I say we sit Russell Wilson and the Titans quarterbacks as we approach the week. All right, Vikings at Bills. Captain, you like that? Kirk Cousins playing some good football right now. He's your quarterback 10 in fantasy at the moment. 17.4 fantasy points in week 9, 265 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception against his former team. Put together a good game overall. In the last 4 weeks, he's had 16 or more fantasy points with a ceiling of 23.4 fantasy points. A relatively safe floor, not the best floor overall, but a safe ceiling as well. Listen, you know what you're getting when you're starting Kirk Cousins, somewhere between 17 and hopefully 23 or 24 fantasy points. This is a tough matchup against the Bills, but I really think at this point in the season we can consider Kirk Cousins a safe start. The ceiling's not really there, but he is a safe start on a week in, week out basis. On the other hand, we got Josh Allen, who is dealing with an elbow injury. We still don't have the full news on what's going to happen this week for Josh Allen at the time that I'm recording this. But obviously, if Josh Allen is healthy, you are starting him. Point blank, no discussion. He's quarterback 1 in fantasy, 26.8 fantasy points in week 9 against the Jets, 205 passing yards, 86 rushing yards, 2 touchdowns. I mean, even with the Jets limiting his ability to throw the football, he's still got it done. This Bills offense is still going to find a way to get it done, but we really need to pay attention to the elbow injury for Josh Allen. I'm really crossing my fingers this is not a serious injury, because missing Josh Allen from this season would be absolutely devastating to the NFL, to fantasy football, just for everyone. This is one of the best players in the entire league at the moment. But on the other hand, Case Keenum is still a capable backup quarterback, and it's interesting going up against one of his former teams in the Minnesota Vikings. But overall, we're not starting Case Keenum. Maybe in deeper super flex leagues, we want to keep an eye on that, but outside of that, Keenum's not going to be a start. So keep an eye on Josh Allen's health throughout the week. We're crossing our fingers on that matter. On the other hand, Kirk Cousins a safe start as we roll into week 10. All right, Texans at Giants. We're sitting Davis Mills. Really nothing to see here from a fantasy perspective. Has not topped more than 19 fantasy points on the season. That was in week 7 against a very bad Raiders defense. If we scratch that game out, he has not topped more than 15.8 fantasy points. Just 13.9 in week 9 against Philadelphia. Hung in this game. Made some good plays. Made some bad plays as well. 154 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Overall, Davis Mills just not a quarterback we are starting from a fantasy perspective. On the other hand, I think that Danny Dimes is a quarterback we can stream against the Houston Texans. Don't get me wrong, the Texans deserve some credit in some aspects in the way that their defense has played. They do not deserve any credit in terms of the run game. Saquon Barkley is going to absolutely eat up this defense, and that could open up some things for Daniel Jones throughout the day. I don't expect a crazy high ceiling for Jones. He's coming off of a bad performance in week 8 against the Seattle Seahawks. 176 passing yards, 20 yards on the ground, and 1 fumble. But overall, I think he can bounce back against this Houston Texans team that just got absolutely shredded by Jalen Hurts and company. But once again, I don't expect a crazy high ceiling, so he's just a streaming option as we approach the week. All right, Jaguars at Chiefs. Trevor Lawrence still in that streaming category in my eyes, right? He's very similar to Geno Smith, where there's just a lot of inconsistency, but Trevor Lawrence is still your quarterback 9 so far on the season. He's still a QB that you can consider on a week in, week out basis, especially if you have a quarterback on bye. 16.7 fantasy points in week 9, 235 passing yards, a touchdown, and 53 yards on the ground. A pretty solid day overall, but you would have expected the ceiling to be a little bit higher playing the Raiders, although the run game really took over in this game script. I mean, you look at week 9, 8.8 fantasy points, week 7, 18 fantasy points, week 6, 24 fantasy points, week 5, 12.3. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is all over the place, but like I said, he's still your quarterback 9, still a considerable streaming option in a game script where presumably the Jaguars will have to throw the football against one of the best teams in the NFL. Taking a look at Patty Mahomes, he's your quarterback 2 in fantasy football. He threw for 446 passing yards against the Tennessee Titans on Sunday Night Football, threw a touchdown, threw an interception. He had 63 yards on the ground and a rushing touchdown. His first rushing touchdown of the season, a season high in rushing yards and a season high in passing yards. Guys, no matter what you do, no matter how much you limit the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid are going to find a way to get it done. Tennessee Titans put together a good game plan. They played a good game of football, but man, this Chiefs team that continues to just dominate year after year. Patrick Mahomes going up against the Jaguars in week 10. I would have no worries whatsoever. He is a locked-in starter as we approach the week. All right, Saints at Steelers. Andy Dalton came back to earth in week 9 after being a good enough streaming option in week 7 and week 8. Week 7, 29.5 fantasy points. Week 8, 17.1 fantasy points. In week 9, like I said, against Baltimore Ravens on Monday Night Football, he completely came back to earth with just 11.9 fantasy points, 210 passing yards, a touchdown towards the very end of this game, and an interception. The Saints offense just absolutely got shut down, and I don't like him in week 10, even though it's a better matchup overall against the Steelers. I just don't think we can trust Andy Dalton as we approach the week. On the other hand, we got Kenny Pickett coming off of a bye week in his rookie season, going up against the Saints defense. Listen, Pickett has definitely had a lot of turnovers since he's been the starter, but the Saints defense is also a little bit banged up. So once again, I could see a game script where both Andy Dalton and Kenny Pickett need to throw the football quite a bit, but overall, I just don't want to trust either quarterback. Pickett had 8.3 fantasy points in his last matchup. Since he's become the starter for the Steelers, he has not topped more than 15 fantasy points, and he has 2 performances with less than 8.35 fantasy points. He's just not a quarterback we are starting in fantasy football as we approach the week. All right, Colts at Raiders. We got another game where we're not considering the quarterback position. Sam Ehlinger in his first 2 starts for the Indianapolis Colts has not topped more than 7.54 fantasy points. We're not considering him whatsoever. We can move right along. On the other hand, we got Derek Carr, who had 18.3 fantasy points in week 9, which is actually his 3rd best performance of the season. But man, I just have no faith in this Raiders offense at the moment. I don't have a lot of faith in this Raiders team at all. They just don't feel exciting. I feel like there's so many missed opportunities against the Jaguars in week 9. I feel like they're letting so many games get away from them. If we go back to week 8, Derek Carr just 2.9 fantasy points, 101 passing yards, and interception. And that was it, man. I mean, look at week 7, 13.5 points. So just a lot of inconsistency here. I just don't trust Derek Carr at the moment. Comes in as your quarterback, 18 overall in fantasy at the moment. Like I said, a pretty good week in week 9, 259 passing yards and 2 touchdowns. But just didn't feel like I came out of that game wanting to trust Derek Carr. So I think both these teams are going to try and rely on the run game. But who knows? I mean, this could be another considerable game script for Derek Carr and a respectable enough stat line, but I just think there are better options out there as we approach the week. All right, Cardinals at Rams. I'm starting Kyler Murray. He's still your quarterback, 6 in fantasy. It's a good enough matchup overall. His worst game of the season was week 3 against the Rams, where he had 12.3 fantasy points, but overall, I just don't think we can afford to sit Kyler Murray. 19 fantasy points in week 9 against Seattle, 175 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, and 60 yards on the ground. I mean, Kyler Murray is just one of those quarterbacks who is someone we have to start on a weekly basis because he has the skill set overall. His ceiling on the season so far, 26.8 fantasy points. He had a little bit of a rough stretch between weeks 5 and 7, but over the last 2 weeks, he's kind of bounced back, especially against Minnesota in week 8 with 26.6 fantasy points. I'm just not sitting Kyler Murray, a top 6 quarterback. We have to continue to start him on a weekly basis. On the other hand, Matthew Stafford is a sit for me, your quarterback, 22 in fantasy at the moment. 10.5 points against Tampa Bay in week 9, 165 passing yards and a passing touchdown. This Rams offense outside of Cooper Kupp and Tyler Higbee just has nothing to offer. They are really struggling at this point in the season, and that week 9 loss was a giant slap to the face. So let's hope that they can get it back together. But let's face it, from a fantasy perspective, like, we're able to start Cooper Kupp and Higbee, and that's it. You know, that's all we really need, I guess. But you would like to see the running back position get a little bit more consistent. You would like to see guys like Van Jefferson and Allen Robinson step up and be more consistent and have bigger roles within this offense. And you would like to see Matthew Stafford get back to the level that he played at last season, where he came in as quarterback 5 at the end of the season. But at the moment, we just have to set Matthew Stafford as we approach week 10. All right, Cowboys at Packers. I'm starting Dak Prescott. Kind of quietly had a 26.4 fantasy day in week 8 against Chicago. Cowboys on bye week in week 9, but 250 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and interception, 34 yards on the ground, and a rushing touchdown. So he really looked like the Dak Prescott that we're used to, and I think we continue to roll with Prescott. I think he's going to finish out the season quite nicely. And let's face it, man, this Cowboys unit is for real. This defense is great. The run game is good. You'd like to see some of these receivers maybe step up behind CeeDee Lamb, but overall, looks like Dalton Schultz is starting to come back to his own with Prescott healthy as well. But ultimately, it feels like this unit's being overshadowed by the Eagles' successes here, but the Cowboys are a very good team. I think that Prescott is a good start as we approach the week. On the other hand, the Packers and Aaron Rodgers are a completely different story. Rodgers comes in as your quarterback, 16 so far on the season. I told you guys, if he can't get it done in week 7 against Washington, he did not. He had 15.7 points. And if he can't get it done against Detroit in week 9 with 16.6 fantasy points, he did not. I can't start Aaron Rodgers. I mean, we already stopped starting him after week 7, but I gave him a little bit of faith again in week 9 he did not. I mean, this offense just continues to struggle. I've never seen a quarterback on the field look so incredibly frustrated. 291 passing yards for Aaron Rodgers was actually a season high, but just one passing touchdown and 3 interceptions, also a season high. And I think there's got to be some accountability here. A lot of those interceptions, if not all of them, were Aaron Rodgers' fault. He did have a season high of rushing yards, but who really cares, right? The offense overall is struggling. Outside of Allen Lazard and Aaron Jones when healthy, I don't trust any of these Packers players from a fantasy perspective. I'm truly hoping they can get this thing turned around, but time is running out, and this is a really tough matchup against the Cowboys here in week 10. Then in the coming weeks, they're going to face the Tennessee Titans, who just played very well against Patty Mahomes and company, the Philadelphia Eagles, and then a humming division rival in the Chicago Bears before a bye week. This is an extremely tough 4-week stretch for Rodgers and the Packers, and I am going to sit him at the start of this stretch here in week 10. All right, Chargers at Niners. Listen, guys, I got Justin Herbert on here as a start, but I'm so weary of Herbert. I thought he'd have a better game against Atlanta in week 9. This game was way too close. It really was. I mean, you got the Falcons, one of the worst team against opposing quarterbacks and receivers in the league, and Herbert, quite frankly, just does not have enough help around him. If you have better options on your team or on your waivers that you feel like are a strong streaming option, you might want to consider them over Justin Herbert. If you don't have any better options, we'll then roll with Justin Herbert. But man, he needs Keenan Allen back. He needs Mike Williams back. He needs some additional help, and he needs his defense to step up as well. In week 9 against the Falcons, just 245 passing yards, a touchdown, and an interception. I mean, we really like to see Herbert get back to the level he was playing at last year, where he came in as quarterback 2 overall in fantasy football. At the moment, he's just your quarterback 14. It is a tough matchup. So even if Herbert wasn't necessarily struggling as much as he is so far in the season, this might be a week where we're kind of looking at things and considering our options, because it's a really stout matchup. So I still have some faith here in week 10 in Herbert, but if you have better options, you might want to take a look at them as we approach the week. On the other hand, we got Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he's a great streaming option. Not a high ceiling. His ceiling on the season is just 18.9 fantasy points, but I do think he's a quarterback we can definitely stream against a Chargers defense that is absolutely struggling. I think this is a good game script for Jimmy Garoppolo. I would expect the Niners to need to throw the football and keep this game competitive. So once again, not a great ceiling, but if you need a streaming option, Jimmy Garoppolo is absolutely an option as we approach the week. All right, Commanders at Eagles, Monday Night Football, last matchup here in week 10. I'm sitting Taylor Heineke. In week 8, he looked good, 23 fantasy points overall. And, I was like, well, maybe there's going to be some matchups throughout the year where we can consider Taylor Heineke as long as Wentz is out. And he came back to earth in week 9 against Minnesota with 14.6 fantasy points. Did have 2 touchdowns, an interception, 17 rushing yards, just 149 passing yards. But here in week 10 against the Eagles, we don't want to test things, right? Even in Superflex, double quarterback leagues, we're not going to start Taylor Heineke unless you absolutely have no other option. So obviously he's going to be a sit. We'll end today's video on a great quarterback to start. If you own Jalen Hurts, you're starting Jalen Hurts on a weekly basis. This matchup against Washington's absolutely beautiful. Last time you faced him was in week 3 at 27.6 fantasy points. It's just a great matchup, and I mean, let's face it, Hurts is quarterback 5 in fantasy. You're starting him no matter what. Week 9 against Houston, 20 fantasy points, 243 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 23 rushing yards. He continues to be a week in and week out player who we are starting at the position and a likely candidate for MVP here in the 2022 season. Hurts is a must start as we approach week 10. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today, be sure to hit that like button on the way out. Hit that subscribe button, of course, if you are new to the channel. Please feel free to drop any comments, questions, concerns pertaining to the 2022 fantasy football season down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I'll say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.